previous video, we talked about the particulars of symbol and allegory. In this video, we will look at 3 poems. The first 2 have some interesting symbols in them, and the last is something we'd call allegorical. The first is Two Fish by KATHA POLLITT. Those speckled trout we glimpsed in a pool last year, you'd take for an image of love. It too should be graceful, elusive, tacit, moving surely among the half-lights of mingled dim and clear, forced to no course, of no fixed residence, its only end its own swift elegance. What would you say if you saw what I saw the other day? That pool, heat-choked and fevered, where sick blue bubbled green scum and blistered water lily. A white like a rolled-back eye or fish's belly I thought I saw far out. But doubtless you prefer to think our trout had left together, to seek a place with less inclement weather. What we have in this poem is one side of a conversation. The subject is about love. The speaker's a little bit more cynical, and the person they're addressing is a little bit more sentimental. What in this poem ought we consider to be symbolic? The fish stand out, let's look at them. Why don't we run them up against that list we talked about in the symbol instructional video? Number 1, are the fish important to the poem? Well, that's an easy one. The title of the poem is Two Fish, so obviously the fish are important. Check. Number 2, do the fish appear more than once? Well, they are in the first line, and they are alive and well, and then we have a possible dead fish in line 11. It's all set up to look like a simile, but it's not really. The speaker seems to be claiming that they saw a belly-up fish, but they leave room for the idea that the fish are fine because they left this particular pond and went to a nicer one. But you get the idea that the speaker's pretty sure that thing out there is a dead fish. And in line 13, the fish are mentioned again, so yes, the fish appear more than once. Check. Number 3, does it appear in a climactic moment? Well, this isn't really a story. Poems don't always have climactic moments, but the fact that the fish show up in the beginning of the poem and at the end of the poem, we could say that they occupy important positions. Number 4, yes, the fish are emphasized through language. They are described as graceful, elusive, tacit, moving surely among the half-lights of mingled dim and clear. This is a lot of time and eloquence to spend on just 2 ordinary fish. Check. And last, does a symbolic reading make sense through the whole poem? That quote is all about the fish representing love, or more accurately, how love should be according to the listener. The speaker's making the point that love isn't always like that. Sometimes love goes belly up because the water and the weather, the conditions and the context of love, gets nasty. But maybe that's not what happens. Maybe love will survive if lovers, like the fish, move together toward healthier places. Besides my list of guidelines, the poem makes a clear connection between the idea of love and the literal fish. That's probably our best clue to interpret these fish symbolically. Ready for another one? Okay, so here is a poem that has more than one symbol in it, and they are not named in the title. In fact, some things aren't named at all, they're just implied. This is Advice to My Son by MIENKE. The trick is to live your days as if each one may be your last, for they go fast and young men lose their lives in strange and unimaginable ways. But at the same time, plan long range, for they go slow. If you survive the shattered windshield and the bursting shell, you will arrive at our approximation here below of heaven or hell. To be specific, between the peony and the rose, plant squash and spinach, turnips and tomatoes. Beauty is nectar, and nectar in a desert saves. But the stomach craves stronger sustenance than the honeyed vine. Therefore, marry a pretty girl after seeing her mother. Show your soul to one man, work with another. And always serve bread with your wine. But son, always serve wine. In the first sentence, the father instructs the son to live life as if his days are few, and as if he were going to live a long time. This is a bit of a paradox. It makes sense when you think about it, though. I'd like to point out some synecdoche in the first lines, since it doesn't show up very often. The shattered windshield and the bursting shell. The shattered windshield is part of a larger car accident. The bursting shell is part of a more general category called the hazards of war. These 2 specific examples are part of a larger whole, strange and unimaginable ways in which young men lose their lives. Synecdoche. Anyway, back to the symbols. The symbols are all packed in the last half of the poem. One of the main trajectories of all this advice is that a good life is a balanced life. So the father tells the son to plant flowers, but also vegetables. Peonies and roses are literal flowers. And the squash, spinach, turnips, and tomatoes are also literal. But the flowers are symbolic of the nice and beautiful things in life. They are lovely, but they aren't as necessary. We can usually live without them. The vegetables are things that sustain us, the things that we can't live without. Notice that there are twice as many vegetables named as flowers. Is the father suggesting symbolically that the ratio of practicalities to pleasures ought to be at about 2 to 1? I doubt he's being that formulaic, but he probably is suggesting that putting a little bit more focus on necessary and sustaining things is a little bit more important. Always serve bread with wine. Literal things, bread and wine, but they represent things beyond themselves. Bread is an essential, and it represents the practical things that we need. Food, of course, but also things like hard work, being responsible, taking care of things that need taking care of, not procrastinating. Wine represents special things, the pleasures, sitting on a beach, playing games with your friends, and laughter and fun. Again, the father is saying that you shouldn't live a life that focuses on pleasure. But then there's the last line. He says that you should never forget the pleasures. Flowers, vegetables, bread, and wine. They are what they are, but that's not all they are. They represent something beyond themselves. Our next poem can be considered an allegory because we find in it a series of things that represents another series of things beyond themselves. A Poison Tree by William Blake. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles, and with soft deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see, my foe outstretched beneath the tree. In the first stanza, we see contrasts between two relationships. One with a friend and one with a foe. When friends make each other angry, they apologize and forgive. But we really don't want to forgive our enemies. And that's what this poem's about. So we have a whole bunch of literal things. The watering and the caring for plants. The sunshine. The plants producing fruit. And then there's the guy who comes into the garden and steals the fruit and eats some of it. But each of these literal things corresponds to something beyond itself. And together they shape a second story, if you will. The plant is the speaker's wrath. The water is his tears and fears. The growth of the plant is the daily increase of the speaker's hatred toward this other person. The sunshine is smiles. But what kind of smiles? Soft, deceitful, and cunning smiles. They're not nice. The apple? Well, all that hatred creates things, ways of being, modes of interacting. The enemy isn't all that innocent here either. The enemy sneaks into the garden and steals the apple. This action can symbolize envy or a desire to hurt the other. The apple also represents a beautiful thing that belongs to someone else, that the enemy covets. And then there's the death of the foe. It's not likely a literal death, but it points to all the ways that we deal with our enemies, that are like murder, especially when you take into consideration the words of Jesus. Whoever hates someone is guilty of murder. Blake knew this verse. When the speaker sees his enemy suffering from the effects of his hate, he is glad. Pretty poignant, no? You can understand allegory as a story that points to another story above or behind it. If you want to have a look at another poem that's allegorical, I've made a video on Robert Frost's A Road Not Taken. Thank you, and we'll see you there.